For those of you that more recently joined, thanks again for joining and welcome to webinar 2 of the LORTA Design Workshop. We're so glad that you could join, and I hope that your breakout sessions have all been going well, and we're excited to hear more from each one of you. To get started, if we can have the next slide, please. We'll go over some housekeeping. If you could please ensure that your mute button is on. And that's not because we don't want to hear from you. We actually really look forward to interacting with you. We just want to make sure that everyone's sound waves and all the sound is clear. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box at any time. And later on, when we have our Q&A session, we'll also have an opportunity to interact with you more live. And so you'll have the opportunity to raise your hands and comment as well. And so, yeah, let's get started. Next slide, please. So a quick review of our agenda for today. I'll be going over some short slides just to review the content that you've been able to review already in the iLearn videos that you received last week. And then following that, Katerina, my colleague Katerina from C4ED, will be coming in and she'll be leading a great discussion on the 2 readings that we had. And then after a quick break, we'll have some project presentations. This will be really exciting. And then following that, we'll have a greater Q&A session and then a quiz to wrap things up. So should we get started? Next slide, please. Great. So as you know, today we're talking about what is a theory of change? Why is it important and how do we use this in our projects? Next slide, please. So to go over a clear view of the definition of a theory of change is an ongoing process of strategic and carefully planned reflection to explore change and how it happens, and what exactly that means for a particular intervention in a particular context with a specific sector and or even a particular group of people. The theory of change presents a structured way of thinking about the change and the impact that organizations would like to achieve. It is also an integrated approach to program design, implementation, monitoring and evaluation, or M&E as we like to call it, and related communications. Next slide, please. The main questions that a theory of change helps us address are, what is the program? What are some problem areas that we do want to address? Who are the key beneficiaries of the project? Also, what outcomes does a program aim to achieve? What is the key entry point to reach these beneficiaries? Another question is, what intermediate steps lead to those outcomes, as well as what assumptions are associated with each link in the causal chain? For example, we want to look at what are the steps that are needed to bring about the necessary change. And finally, how can we measure the outcomes? What are the indicators that will be fruitful for the evaluation? What is the measurable effect of the project? And what are the wider benefits of the project? And ultimately, this all leads us to what are the long-term changes that we aim to see? And this is why, the next slide, please. The theory of change tells us the story of a project and its vision for change. It's a conceptual map from project to the ultimate goal. And if you can imagine that each project is like a Lego masterpiece, I think someone is unmuted. If you could please mute your microphone, it'd be great. So much. And so if you can imagine that each project is a Lego masterpiece, then the theory of change is like a manual book because it articulates the project and all the underlying details in the balance, or the assumptions and mechanisms that inform each question that needs to be answered. The theory of change is also a major player in enabling the M&E, or the monitoring and evaluation of a project, to facilitate understanding of how the project has achieved its goal or its desired outcome. And while it's called a theory of change, it is absolutely an evidence-informed theory, and that's for accountability and effectiveness of achieving the ultimate goal. Next slide, please. Now, to review the purpose of a theory of change. A theory of change helps us to prioritize which projects get evaluated and which do not. And it also supports institutional learning, thus also accountability, and ultimately increases institutional credibility and governance. In GCF's case, it helps keep It helps keep us, apologies. It helps to keep us accountable, to have clear areas to see whether the project is on the right side of the progress to achieving the long-term project goals. Next slide, please. And most importantly, theories of change support the better assessment of how effective each intervention is by helping to define the purpose of an evaluation, the specific processes or behaviors and that the project will influence, and also to highlight critical assumptions and risks. Next slide, please. How do we design a theory of change? Most of you who have already have a project in the pipeline have already done this project, have already done this process. And some of the participants that we have joining us today also are still in the process of waiting for that project to be to enter the pipeline. And so just to review some of the steps that you might already be familiar with, this theory of change that's listed on this slide comes from a project from the Development Bank of South Africa that joined the LORTA portfolio projects around 2019 or so. And this was a theory of change that was developed through the LORTA design workshop with the impact evaluation specialists that we have on board here. By designing a theory of change, we're able to establish the possible causal pathways. And so all the arrows that you see here point between cause and effect. And the theory of change lays out all the building blocks that are required to activate and accomplish a given goal. The arrows can graphically reflect an expected timescale of change, whether it's short-term or long-term. And it really helps us to understand how a project could go from a planned activity eventually to long-term change on the ground and why the project will work. Each node also carries assumptions that inform causal relationships between the nodes, because without these assumptions, without consideration of the assumptions, the process or the progress of the project, it's bound to be disconnected somewhere along the theory of change. In that process, unintended consequences must also be explicitly defined. And identifying these assumptions amongst the theory of change nodes, it's crucial to identify potential direct or indirect risks in your project's local context, as well as intended as well as unintended consequences. And the nodes capture drivers or action points, as well as consequences. And so the causal relationships are mapped by taking us on the journey of progress, or the causal links between the activity, outputs, outcomes, and ultimately the goal. And so you can see here, listed in the blue node, is the activity that a climate fund is established. Again, this comes from a project by the Development Bank of South Africa. And in the orange box, we see the goals of the project, and then the gray boxes list the intermediate outcomes. And so you can see that once the climate fund is established, there's the second level of output that's directly seen, and that's that loans are provided by the private sector. And so a possible unintended consequence that might surface here is that interest rates might climb a lot or might peak. And that might not be something that was planned or that had been considered before, but could be an unintended consequence. Great. Now, moving on from here, I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Katerina, who will take us through the reading discussions. Over to you, Katerina.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Nice to meet everyone. My name is Katerina, as Deborah kindly introduced. You may have seen me already in the video that was shared with you, and I'm very happy to go over the readings with you today. So there were 3 suggested readings that were shared with you, and I would like to present 2 of them, which I think are very nice complements. So they give us a very nice overview. And I would like to start with Rogers, Patricia, on the uses of the theories of change. And then with Davis, we will look more into the challenges developing them. Thank you. Yeah. So first, let's look into Rogers 2014. And she actually identifies 4 major uses, which may also be useful for your project. So I would like to discuss them with you. So first, important use of theory of change for why it can be helpful to you is that it helps strategic planning or program policy planning, because with the TOC, we think carefully about the current situation for the population that we have as the target group, and we see whether there are actually specific needs that need to be addressed and included in project planning in order to bridge these nodes that we were talking about, right? So in order to bridge the nodes, which means we reach one chat or one chain in the theory of change chain from one chain node to the next chain node. So what needs to be addressed and included in the project planning in order to bridge the nodes, but also which opportunities does the current situation offer in order to bridge the nodes better than we had maybe first thought. So for these considerations, a theory of change may help us. And then second point related to that is that we can identify what actually needs to be done in order to reach an intended situation. Yeah. So this brings along a careful thinking about what actually can be reached given the current situation, and helps design more realistic goals. So this is also very important when we think about the whole process again. And then by clearly mapping out the theory of change, this helps us clarify also accountability is also extremely important for any project implementation. So identify who is really responsible for what. And then finally, we would establish a common understanding of strategies to be used in order to achieve the goals that we want to achieve. The third use of a theory of change would go to monitoring. So here it would be extremely useful to think clearly about the theory of change for our monitoring approach, as it helps us define the relative indicators which we should look at for monitoring. And then fourth point, lastly, and now we actually go to the actual topic of what we want to use the theory of change for during this virtual workshop. So the theory of change helps us to define adequate impact evaluations of your projects. So I would like to look deeper into this point. Next slide, please. Exactly. So with an eye on the impact evaluation, the theory of change actually identifies or helps us identify specific evaluation questions, especially on elements of the theory of change which actually lack evidence. Yeah, so this means for some expected changes, the pathways may be very well established, right? But for others, the mechanisms may not be so clear. And here, specifically, it would be useful to measure the effect with the impact evaluation. Yeah, so especially when we're not sure whether we can really reach the the effect that we want to reach. Then what the theory of change also helps us identify is relevant variables for data collection. So what information do we actually need to collect data on in order to have a complete picture for impact evaluation? Then it also helps us identify intermediate outcomes. So markers of success when the expected impacts extend actually the time frame of the evaluation. So here I would get back to the example from the video, also which Deborah just mentioned to us. So here we talked about reduce greenhouse gas emissions as impact of a project, and these could be difficult to measure during an impact evaluation, or maybe take too long until they are measurable or visualizable. But the intermediate outcome, so the amount of biomass needed, for instance, may be measurable, and therefore this could be something that TOC helps us, would be an indicator that we can actually look at in order to learn something about the impact, which we will not be able to measure potentially. So then another aspect that the theory of change helps us identify would be aspects of implementation that should be examined. So while thinking about the whole process, things may come to our mind which we haven't had on our mind before. And then lastly, also, it may help us think about potentially relevant contextual factors to be included in the data collection and also in the analysis later on. So the last point that Rogers would like to emphasize on, and we as well, is that the theories of change that we developed together and also that we developed during the breakout sessions already, please don't understand them as static. So theories of change are a dynamic building and are meant to be adjusted whenever you have a different perspective about your project. So your understanding of project implementation, what would maybe be better, what should be changed, changes, then always it is very suitable and the best way to also revise and review the theory of change that you developed. So please understand it as kind of living document and adjust it as needed in the course of the evaluation. Next slide, please. Okay, then Rogers also gives us more insights about theory of change development. So here we also wanted to show you a different setup of a theory of change. So we already said that theories of change, and you know that theories of change can have different representations. So here you see a little bit of a different representation than before. We see 4 levels here. Before we had used 5 levels. So there are slight differences. Just to make you aware, and in this case, but also many similarities. So in this case, we start with the implementation strategies, which we also called activities before our inputs, and then would move on, like the second node would again be outputs, which we had the name the same term for, and then come with Rogers the outcomes, and we had included additionally intermediate outcomes here. Yeah, so like the theory of change development is quite flexible. We can adjust it whatever we think is most suitable. So here Rogers only has 1 outcome, and then finally the impact, which we have as well, of course. And then when we look at the left side of the picture, here we directly see how the theory of change can help us identify indicators, identify how we can measure the different steps of theory of change. So you see it from outputs. There's a link directly to output indicators. So once we thought so much about what the outputs, the next step after implementing our activities would be, then this will also help us identify how we could measure these outputs and what would be suitable indicators to measure these outputs. And the same holds for outcome indicators and finally for impact indicators. Yeah. But then what we would like to put also a lot of emphasis on is the right side of the picture, where we see the assumptions and risks. And these are linked to these links between the different nodes, yeah, which is so important, like the connections. And the connections, so whether the connections work or not, is dependent on the assumptions and risks, which we have to think about when we design the theory of change and also when we design the impact evaluation. Okay, next slide, please. Good. Then Rogers also kindly provides us with a list of information and processes that we actually have to include in theory of change development. So for theory of change development, we have to conduct a needs assessment, which identifies what must be in place for the success of the project. Yeah, and this will help us evaluate the implementation. Then we also have to include documented objectives. So whatever objective your project team thought about and ideally also included in the project documents, this will also be included in the theory of change, such that we understand what are actually the outcomes, the impacts that we want to reach. Then we should also include previous evaluations that were conducted in order to learn from what was already done before, right? And also research on similar programs. Additionally, we should include expert opinion, and this goes in line with probably also the next step, because we would also want to include the perspectives of staff and managers, partners, which are also experts in a way, and the community members, which are of course experts for their specific situations, and we would include their opinion about how, and not so much whether or not the intervention would work, because the whether or not we will test it with the impact evaluation or measure with the impact evaluation, but from them it's extremely important for us to understand how the intervention would work or fail to work. Then what we should also include is feedback from relevant stakeholders on draft versions of the TOC. So once we have draft versions, we should distribute it among our relevant stakeholders and ask for feedback for whether we really display a realistic situation of our project. And finally, we should include research-based theories about how change occurs. Yeah. Okay, next slide, please. So this was the presentation, brief review of this first reading that we wanted to discuss with you on Rogers 2014. And now it would be, now you heard quite a lot from us. You had to listen quite a lot to what we wanted to share with you. And now it would be great to also hear your voices and your opinions and your experiences. So this would be great also for all colleagues from the other project teams to hear a little bit your experience with TOC development. So did the process of, sorry, back to the next slide, to the last slide, please. Exactly. So first, the first question which we would be interested in would be whether the process of TOC development actually helped you clarify important assumptions and risks. Did it help you identify things there? And then we know that the time is of course limited during the breakout sessions, but if you had more time, what information would have been helpful to also include in your theories of changes? What do you think? And then lastly, which theory of change uses that I presented before, do you imagine would be helpful for you? So if you could share any experience, any opinion with me and with all of us, that would be great and much appreciated.
Thank you, Katerina. And so if anyone would like to talk about their project and be able to answer those questions, please feel free to raise your hand or and interact with us and share a little bit about these questions specifically. And remember that you can also post your questions or your comments in the chat box as well. Would anyone like to come in and answer some of those questions? We'd love to hear more about your projects.
Could we get back to that slide, please? That might be easier. Yeah, perfect, thanks.
Or Katerina, perhaps we could actually go into the second reading and then have the interactive version at the very end.
Yes, I agree. Let's do that. Then people can make up your mind. So please think about it. So during the theory of change development, maybe some of these things came to your mind. And if so, it would be great for us and for all the rest to hear about it. Okay, but while you maybe make up your mind and can think about these questions, let us move to the second reading, which is from Davis. And that these are 2 more slides, I think. Yeah, perfect. Because, yeah, now we heard about the uses of theory of change and also maybe tips about the development of theories of change, but still it's not so easy, right? So, and here comes Davis, the literature from him, 2018, who actually conducted a literature review of different developed theories of change. And he looked for strength in those theories of change and also what could still be improved. And he identified quite some challenges with the development of theories of change. Maybe you also occurred those. And the major challenge which he identified was to manage actually two competing but two valid requirements for theory of change development, which is not so easy. And the first requirement is the simplicity of a theory of change. So a theory of change can also help us if it is readable, and only then it will be usable, right? So if it helps us get a clearer picture of our overall project and how it could work in the end. So you can imagine, if you think you should include all the project details, all the little details in your theory of change, then you could probably easily think about a 50 pages document, which would include all the detail, but then it will not be usable for us anymore, right? So it's too complex to actually help us understand the project better. We would have to read all those 50 pages. So it has to be simple enough, but at the same time, it also has to entail sufficient detail, which ensures a good match with the actual complexity of your project, the actual complexity of the real world. Yeah, and this is quite a challenge, but we need this complexity. So we need to have sufficient detail in the theory of change in order to identify jointly whether your project is actually evaluable. And in what sense, yeah, and how this evaluation should look like. What is the best impact evaluation that we could conduct? And what does evaluability actually mean? So it is defined as the extent to which an activity or project, so all your projects, can actually be evaluated in a reliable and credible fashion. Yeah, reliable and credible. So this is what impact evaluations are supposed to do. And this is exactly why we ask all these detailed questions in our breakout sessions in order to identify how we can create a reliable and credible impact evaluation. So for instance, we have to have a specific sample size, right? So we have to ask you all these questions about your project population. And the goal of this is to identify evaluability. Thank you. Next slide. So, but beyond that, Davies also identified further challenges, which are mainly referring to the connections in the theory of change. So we talked quite a lot about that. And of course, in the theory of change, or for your project to hold, it's absolutely crucial that you reach from one node to the next. So the connection is crucial. And similarly, it should also be crucial in the theory of change outline. But most often, these are not described in theory of changes. So this is what Davis finds out. And the theory of changes often fail to adequately describe the expected causal connection. So some events are even left unconnected. And most often, no color, shape coding, or text annotations are included for these connections. And when linkages are described, then there are often more causal pathways than practically evaluable. Yeah, so this is also, so we have to, so this is, I think, what we also try to look at in the breakout sessions. So we have to focus on evaluable components of your project. And then as a fifth point, feedback loops are uncommon in the theories of change. So it would actually be good to include also feedback loops. So you can imagine if once an outcome is reached, then it could have, again, impacts or effects on the project population. And this should also be included in the theory of change. And Davis also identifies when these feedback loops are included, then the loops increase complexity too much. I mean, this is also a bit unfair, right? So when people included the feedback loops, but then the complexity is too much. I mean, this can easily happen. So it's just not an easy undertaking, but we have to find ways to balance two aspects. And Davis luckily also presents solutions or suggests solutions. On the next slide, please. So first, he suggests a better description of the connections. So, and to make this easier, he suggests to differentiate between necessary and sufficient causes graphically. So the one connection could be identified necessary for the occurrence of the event, then this should be a priority, and then this should also be graphically shown as a priority. So that means if this connection fails to work, then our whole theory would fail and our project would not lead to the outcomes that we expect. But a connection could also be sufficient, so increased resilience, for instance, within the project. And if they fail, then this does not doom the whole theory, but some aspects. And then this should also be graphically shown. Next slide, please. Then in order to manage this in a better way, there are also specific drawing softwares which we would like to draw your attention to. So typically the software used is Word, Excel, PowerPoint, but there are also alternatives which should get more attention. So maybe for the future, this may be interesting for your project teams if you would like to look into other tools such as DoView, Change Rule, Tokul from the Center for Theory of Change, or Theory Maker. So you could maybe explore a little bit and see whether one of those softwares might be more suitable to you. Okay, the next slide, please. Okay, so with that, I thank you very much for your attention. And I have some further discussion points, which would be extremely interesting to hear from you, but you can also just decide to get back to whatever you find interesting and can relate to during the discussion. So first, it would be interesting to hear what your experience dealing with this trade-off between simplicity and sufficient complexity was when you created your theory of change. Maybe you can even share good practices, how you managed to share that with your fellow project team. So that would be great. And then beyond an adequate theory of change, what else has to be provided to guarantee project evaluability, in your opinion and based on the reading? And what is your opinion on the presented solutions to the identified challenges? So do you think those could be helpful to you, realistic, or only realistic under specific circumstances? Yes, thank you. This is all from my side. So I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Katerina. And if anyone would like to share about these discussion points, or even on the discussion points from the first reading that was more on the development and design and the different uses of a theory of change, please feel free to raise your hand and we would love to hear more from you. And Katerina, while we're waiting for that, there are a couple questions in the chat box. And one is, I can answer this question. It's if Davies, this reference on Davies, if it's a reference book. So when you look on the iLearn platform at the video that was provided for the Theory of Change webinar that we had today, there's actually a link for resources, and you can click on that and find the actual file that will be available for you. And then another question is, how are colors or coding used in the theory of change? It's been mentioned as a barrier. Would you like to take this one, Katerina?
Yeah, sure. So exactly. So this is just a suggestion from Davis, how we could cope better with this. And this can particularly easily used in those a little more sophisticated tools, right? That he also mentioned. So there it can be easier. I mean, you can also do it with PowerPoint or with Word, that you can, for instance, color the different arrows in a different way, depending on whether they are sufficient or necessary nodes, arrows in order to reach the next node. So this could be helpful. I hope this answers your question.
Thank you very much. And please feel free to raise your hand or to post your questions in the chat box. And this time we wanted to open up the discussion and also the questions that you might have while they're fresh in your mind. We will also have a longer Q&A period in the second half, so you'll have some time to ask them as well. Perhaps if we don't have any raised hands just yet, and if people are still digesting and processing this information to be able to share more about the discussion or even to ask their questions, perhaps now would be a good time for us to take a 5-minute break, and we'll return after just 5 minutes. Great, thank you very much, and see you in 5 minutes. Okay, great. It's been about 5 minutes. And if everyone's ready, we can continue on with our second session. Could we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So now we'll go into the two project preparations or project presentations. First, we have a presentation from FP 023, and following that will come from FP 106. Just as a reminder, each presentation will be approximately 10 minutes, and then we'll have time for 5 minutes of Q&A discussion for each project. And so FP 23, if you're ready, we'd love to hear from you. Would that be the CRAVE project, or is that FP 106? Namibia, thank you. I see that you're not muted. I'm not sure if we're not able to hear you just
Good
yet.
afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. My name is Mokwetu Motota, and I'll be presenting to you on FP 023, the theory of change. Perhaps I'll just give you a bit of an introduction of what the project is all about before we go to the theory of change. This is a project which was approved in 2016 already by GCF. It's managed by the accredited entity, which is the Environmental Investment Fund. It's a 5-year project that started in 2017 to 2022. It's a $10 million and beneficiaries are around 21,000, both direct and indirect beneficiaries. What is the objectives that we want to achieve as a project? We really want to achieve a reduction in terms of climate vulnerability, of which most of our farmers are really impacted by the impact of climate change, by increasing the adaptive capacity of those specific farmers who are targeting both dryland and horticulture farmers. The two objectives sub-objectives that we really need to achieve again is looking at strengthening the
I'm so sorry.
adaptive capacity of the farmers. Am I okay?
Yes, it's a little bit harder to hear you. Would you be able to increase your volume, please? So sorry to interrupt you. You're just going in and out with your sound.
How is it now?
It's a lot better. Thank you so much.
Okay. Then we have the provisioning component, where we are supporting the farmers with alternative sustainable access to off-grid, whereby we are supporting them with the solar water pump for them to improve their productive capacity. Then we have the component of the strengthening, which is increasing their coping mechanism to be able to implement the actions that we identified during the proposal drafting on the ground in terms of practical actions, in terms of comprehensive conservation agriculture, as well as climate resilient agriculture. As I said, we are in the 3 regions of Namibia: Northern Eastern region, Kavango East, Kavango West. I wish I could project this, where we are going to implement our interventions, or we are currently implementing our intervention, Kavango East, Kavango West. What is our activities? We have a lot of activities. We only selected a few for the TOC. We only selected one. But if we look at what we want to achieve in terms of our activities and output, we are looking at Mashare Climate Resilient Agriculture as a center of excellence. This is one of them, which is currently headed by...
Sorry, you are breaking up. We can't hear you properly.
Yes, it might be your connection. Your sound is
hi, this is Ani from the ICT Service Desk. I'm sorry to interrupt, but could you disconnect your microphone or the headphone that you've got connected, and could you reconnect it? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your patience, everyone, as we just get the connection things figured out.
Is it okay now? Or it's still the same?
I think once you start speaking, we'll be able to tell more.
Okay.
Thank you. Please feel free to continue.
Okay, so in terms of output 2, we're looking at field research, trials, and demonstration sites, where we are looking at demonstrating climate resilient adaptation measures, both for horticulture farmers and for rain-fed farmers. Then we have output 2.1, which is looking at developing or sharing with farmers cropping practices and production, both from pre-production to post-production, in terms of sustainable farming for both dryland and horticulture. So we are basically building their capacity for them to be able to adapt better through training, through capacity development facilities for them to improve their resilience. We have an innovative component to it as well, which is now a crop insurance mechanism that looks at how do we cover risks that are associated with climate change. Then we have a component that looks at solar energy access, where we are providing solar water pumps to horticulture farmers, basically to improve their resilience or their adaptation, but also looking at the mitigation component as a core benefit for adaptation, for mitigation. Then 3.2, we're looking at diversifying. How do I diversify the farmers' livelihood and give them alternative way to facilitate adaptation through business development and also through entrepreneurial skills development. Am I clear? Sorry, my background. I'm trying to catch up a bit.
Hello, Mkwetu.
Oh, it's still breaking.
We can hear you when you begin speaking, but then as you continue, the sound starts to fade out a little bit.
And also we cannot see what you are talking on the screen. Are you sharing what you are talking with?
Are you not able to see the slides on the screen?
You can see the document, but when she talked about 1.3, 1.2, we cannot see it. Where is it?
Okay, thank you so much for clarifying. And again, everyone, thank you so much for your patience as we figure out worldwide internet connections. I wonder if maybe we can give you some time to sort out the connection issue. And I wonder if we could actually maybe move on to the other project presentation and then maybe return if the connection works out.
Okay, is the connection still down?
Do we have the team from the Development Bank of South Africa?
Yes.
FPU. Great.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ntombe Zinhle Nzama, but everyone calls me Zinhle. So I'm just going to give a brief introduction to the project before we go into the theory of change that we developed. So just to check, can you hear me properly? No issues.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right then. So in line with commitments to transition to a low carbon economy, the Department of Energy designed the sovereign-backed renewable energy independent power producers procurement program. So then, recognizing the limitations of just relying on government-backed renewable energy programs, there was a shift towards an energy mix, and that was put in place. This then included the embedded generation, which is the production of electricity from smaller scale power stations. These lie usually outside of the formal government procurement programs and usually are defined as projects that are planned for own use or own consumption. Embedded generation renewable energy projects have no demonstrable track record of successfully reaching financial close. Therefore, the key objective of our project, the Embedded Generation Investment Program, is to formulate this track record to ensure that the initial projects reach financial close. So by so doing, a market for embedded generation is then created. So this is what the program is about. So as part of this program, there is a gender action plan that was put in place for the projects that will fall under this program. This is just to ensure that specific targets for participation of women are put in place and actioned. And this will also enable the participation of organizations that are owned and led by different women groups so that the participation is improved. We can move to the next, we are there, yeah. So the theory of change is based on one aspect of the gender action plan, which is the training and capacity building of women so that they are able to participate in the Embedded Generation Investment Program. So for our first block, we have what we defined as our input, which is develop gender sensitive training programs and capacity building programs to encourage the participation of organizations that are owned and led by different women groups. And then the assumptions linked to this are that the first one is facilities, trainers, and the materials are actually available. Training material is credible and applicable. And thirdly, training material is designed to empower and capacitate women in particular to participate in the EGIP. So our next block is our activities, which is to provide technical training and capacity building to enable women-owned and led organizations to participate in the Embedded Generation Investment Program. And the assumptions linked to this are firstly, that women-led and owned businesses are interested and are willing to participate in the program. The second is that the coaches or the trainers are equipped to provide good quality training, and that women must have access to the training program. The last one is that the training programs should be recognized by the relevant authorities, so it must be credible. The next node is then our outputs, which is women are capacitated and trained to enable them to participate in the Embedded Generation Investment Program. And the assumptions linked to this are that trainees are able to understand the training material. Lessons from the training can be applied in the Embedded Generation Investment Program. The trained woman owned and led organization actually then participate in the renewable energy sector. And then going on to our outcome is that more women are capacitated and able to undertake and implement projects within the Embedded Generation Investment Program effectively and efficiently. The assumptions linked to that are that the training increases the employability of women. There's long-term job opportunities which are available, and that participation of organizations that are owned and led by different women groups, we see that participation increasing in the renewable energy sector. So for our goal, we have improved long-term employability of women, but also women-owned and led organizations participate actively in the renewable energy sector. So this was our attempt at the theory of change for the program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dinley. And I would just like to remind everyone that if you have any questions or any specific things that you would like more clarity on as we're learning from each other, then please feel free to use the chat box. And for the CRAVE project, I just wanted to give an update that because of the connection issues, I believe that Clementine, who is the impact evaluation specialist that's been working with FP23, she'll be able to come in and complete the presentation on the project.
Yes, sure. Thanks, Deborah. And hi, everyone. I will speak in the name of the product team, and if I do any mistake, please, anyone from product team, don't hesitate to write on the chat or to interrupt me, and I hope that I will reflect what we have discussed together. How was mentioned so far, the project encompasses actually quite a lot of complementary activities, but for sake of simplicity, during our breakout session, we chose to focus only on one of these activities, such that we are really able to think about all the expected outcomes from this specific activity. So the one we focused on is the establishment of the Machere Climate Resilient Agricultural Center of Excellence. So from this activity, we expect the following output, which is that the Center of Excellence is being established and operational. Then what is the role of the center is to implement trials on demonstration plots and to train small-scale farmers on adaptive agriculture. So we expect these activities to be conducted by the center. Then what we would like to see is that the training participants, so these small-scale farmers, have an improved knowledge on climate resilient agriculture. And at the end of the day, the project overarching objective will be that these farmers have a reduced vulnerability and an increased capacity. So this is for the causal chain related to this activity, but now on what assumptions does this causal chain rely on? So from the first node to the second, two main assumptions are that the funds are sufficient and made available for the project to be able to implement the center and to make it operational. It also relies on the ability of human capital. Then from the second node to the third node, the ability to make the center run relies on availability of researchers. So the ability of a project to recruit researchers who are willing to work on this topic of climate resilient agriculture, and then to participate and lead these activities. They should also be willing to participate in the context of a project which has limited equipment and resources. Then from conducting training to an improvement in knowledge, this rely on having training of good quality and on farmers being also willing to participate in this training. So for that, they should be aware of the benefits of climate resilient agricultural practices. And at the end of the day, from an improved knowledge to a reduction in vulnerability, we need that the training participants implement the recommended agricultural practices. And for this, there's the risk that there's a too strong attachment to traditional practices and a high perception of risk to change from these traditional practices to the recommended one. So farmers should be convinced that this climate resilience agriculture can really bring benefits for them. Another assumption that we mentioned is access to weather forecasts, as the unpredictability of the weather may strongly affect agricultural outcomes. So it's not only about knowing what to do, but also when to do it, and for that you need good weather information.
Thank
So
you.
that's it from my side, and if the curve team has anything to add, I will be happy to hear.
Thank you so much, Clementine. It looks like we have one hand raised. Yves, would you like to come on in with your question?
Yes, thank you, Deborah. I just have a quick questions for the last presenter. I think the theory of change as presented is very good, but I have a little bit an issue on the assumption about the Center of Excellence being established and operational. while the assumption is researchers of the center are willing to participate. I think this can certainly become a big risk to achieve the project outcome. I think in such a project, the researchers of the center are key actors and should be involved in the project design. We shouldn't be thinking about they're willing to participate. I think the participation of the researchers should no longer be an assumption, but really they are part of the project. That's the question I have, because without that, you won't be able to achieve the outcome of the project at all.
Yeah, thanks for your question. So I will first come in, and if someone from the craft team want to say something more, they can feel free to do so. So here, like, of course, the project has been thought in a way that they want to try to attract the relevant researchers with the relevant skills. However, there's so much you can control, right? They cannot force them to take part and to do a good job. I guess they thought about ways to try to check that and to monitor their own activities, but it's still something that you need to check in your monitoring system. So this is why we put it as an assumption, because of course you can provide all the conditions for it to happen, but at the end you don't fully control it. So you still want to check whether it really worked.
If I may, quickly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was thinking if we're talking now about the participation of the researchers, is becoming for me a project design issue. If we're talking about the quality of the training they will be giving to the farmers, that's another one, that's another issue. But really, in this project, it cannot be an assumption of the participation of these researchers. They need to participate. What they're going to deliver, though, might not be accurate or might not be relevant to what the farmer are looking for. I'm looking more at the training that will be delivered, but not the participation as an assumption per se. That's the point I'm making here.
Thank you. Clementine, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. I would like to say, like, if anyone who was attending the breakout session from Crave could elaborate on that and say what they thought it's a relevant assumption. Otherwise, what I can just add is that it's linked, right? Because the researcher will both conduct the research and the training in this context, if I understood correctly. So it will be linked to their overall motivation. So this is what is meant by participation. Maybe that was a bit the confusing bit.
Can I come in maybe on the answering part of the question?
Absolutely.
I hope I'm clear. Yes. In terms of the researchers' willingness or not willing to participate in the trials or climate resilient agriculture related activities, what we have realized, we have, for example, the University of Namibia, we are currently working on, specifically looking at research under MACRAES. But when we have identified the concept or the areas that we need to look at, for example, the fertilizer application, we couldn't really get a researcher or someone who is within the academia to be able to carry out that specific research. So it took us a longer period to identify suitable candidates or suitable researchers to be able to partake in those specific topics. So hence, we are talking about the willingness to participate in the research activities, not all of them, certain activities that are attached to MACRAES as a center of excellence. In terms of the quality of training, we are developing various curriculum at different levels based on the needs for the farmers. So we have standards that are in place, for example, on horticulture. So we ensured that, okay, this is a process. We ensure that at least the standards that are accredited by accredited entities or institutions are applied across all the farmers at different levels of their capacity, both for dryland farmers and horticulture farmers. So hence, we are ensuring that at least the quality of the trainings are really at standard.
Thank you so much. And while we're on your project, there's another question in the chat box for the CRAVE project. And from SAP 23, we have Graciela Reyes, who says, both projects are very interesting. Thank you for sharing. In CRAVE, if implementation of CRA practices are not part of the theory of change and only an assumption, how would you know that the reduced vulnerability is not because of other initiatives in place, for instance, subsidies or taxes? And I wonder if anyone from CRAVE would like to come in.
If I get the question clearly, I cannot see it.
And just to let you know, your sound is still, it's mostly in now, but then it does seem to draw back a little bit. I wonder if you speak a little bit more slowly or closer to your computer, the sound will project better.
Okay. The climate, we only selected one activities as a practice for a theory of change, but we still have theory of change, other activities. We also have capacity building for climate resilient agriculture. So implementation for climate resilient agriculture and comprehensive conservation agriculture practices are also part of the theory of change. It's just that we didn't have time to go through all the activities and develop theory of change for all the activities. We only chose one in terms of MACRAES as a center of excellence. But if there's a need for us to continue with other activities and then develop a theory of change, we'll be able to do that.
Thank you so much. Graciela, I hope that answers your question. If not, please feel free to clarify in the chat box or also raise your hand as well. And it looks like we do have some more questions in the chat box. And at any time, if you haven't yet, please feel free to post them in there. And also, of course, to raise your hand. We have one question on, this is more of a GCF related question. And it says, in terms of GCF projects, the logical framework has predefined expected results and the associated indicators for fund level impact and fund level outcomes. Does that always form a basis while designing the theory of change for projects under GCF? And I believe for this question, we have our evaluation specialist, Dr. Martin Prowse, ready for this question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Deborah, and thank you very much, Mukti Bikram, for the question. So yes, you're right. GCF project's logical framework has the expected results, predefined expected results and indicators at the fund level. So within the GCF portfolio, we build up from the project level to the program level. And so at the portfolio, when we aggregate across the portfolio, we build up at that level. So our approach within building the theories of change for the impact evaluations here, the theories of change for impact evaluations focus on, as you know, just one subcomponent or component of the projects. So in that sense, we're not conducting our impact evaluations on the entire project, and in that sense, the impact evaluations will only, to a limited extent, be able to feed up to the program level and also to the portfolio level to inform GCF fund level impact and fund level outcomes. I'd also like to respond quickly to the question from Jörg Clara, who asked around the guidelines for the newly approved GCF results management framework. So thank you for the question. Jörg Clara. And you're right, the GCF recently adopted an integrated results management framework, and this was adopted in February this year. And the guidelines are a part of that, part of the 2021 work program for the Secretariat. And these are being completed by the Secretariat and have not been completed yet. But you're right that they will provide more guidance and more support in the construction of theories of change. So the integrated results management framework offers a much more sort of systematic approach to measuring the results measurement in the fund. And at the impact level, the results management the integrated results management assesses the contribution of GCF projects to paradigm shift, and it does so in three dimensions: scale, depth, and sustainability. And the Secretariat will utilize scorecards for measuring a project's contribution to paradigm shift. So those two questions are interrelated, and I hope that I've managed to respond adequately to your question, Jörg and Mukti. And on that note, I'll hand back to Deborah, Clementine, and Katerina. Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you very much, Martin. And before I go on to our next question in the chat box, Katerina, I see that you've got your hand raised.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Yeah, I thought I would like to come in because I feel these two last questions maybe go in a similar direction, which so I feel that that maybe with some participants feel that the structure of the theory of change could be restricting them and restricting us in what we can actually evaluate, but that is not the case. So even if you put maybe something which is very important in under the assumptions, this can still be part of the evaluation, right? So you would not have to fear that it's then out of the evaluation for the project. So the research center's willingness, for instance. So that can still be part of the measurement. We could still measure that and include it in the final analysis. So that's perfectly fine. It doesn't have to pop up really in these notes. It's just important for all of us to understand what are all the, so this could be also a contextual factor maybe. What are all the factors that could influence the work, the functioning of the project, and then we can still include it. So don't worry too much about where things stand. It's just important that we understand all of them. And maybe this goes in a similar direction to the predefined expected results part of the logical framework from the GCF side. So this can be part of the impact evaluation, but so you don't have to be afraid that you have to focus too much on that. So first, maybe let you think openly about what for your project team would be the most important success factor, as Martin also said, right? So so you don't have to feel that you have to focus too much on something that's already predefined, but be open about what would you think, when would your projects be actually successful, and that is what we can then measure. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that, Katerina. We do have a question for Crave, for the Crave project, and Peter Christopher from CRDB, he says, can you briefly explain what is the project all about? And I think this can also be open to anybody on the Crave team that would like to respond. Do we have a representative of the Crave team? Okay, while we give you some time, okay, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I know my connection is not so good. I just wanted then to explain in terms of what is MACRACE. This is basically one of our outputs that we need to achieve by the end of the project. This is a center currently managed by government under the Ministry of Agriculture. The reason why CRAVE need to come in is for us to improve the current status of the center in terms of the infrastructure, and also develop a business model that will then help for the center to at least function or operationalize in a level that at least it's improving the capacities of the farmers in terms of climate resilient agriculture. Under that, we are developing a business model. Within the business model, we have then a strategic plan that shows the visions and the way in which we need to implement activities that help the center to become a center of excellence. We also have developed a resource mobilization strategy that helps then to resource or source additional resources and funds from different donors that we are coordinating and creating synergy to support then the implementation of the center's activities. Within MACRACE, there's a component of research which is attached to it, where we have then the identification of potential technologies that will then help farmers to improve their cropping practices using the identified technology. And within that, we have then the market, financial markets that attach to that through the clean development mechanism, payment for ecosystem, as well as the biocarbon funds that we need to look at in terms of identifying those technologies. We have then the element of monitoring ecosystems and landscapes using geographical GIS, Geographical Information System, and remote sensing for them to be able to assess the key hotspots within the 3 regions in terms of monitoring the changes in climate change. MACRACE again has a component of information sharing for the farmers that also includes training that we are providing for the farmers to enhance their capacity to improve their adaptability in terms of climate change. But we also linked a component of land use practices as well as sustainable land management practices that are attached to the component of MACRACE. In addition to MACRACE, we have a component or activities that are linked also to seed production and seed multiplication, which we're basically looking at the improved seed variety, mainly looking at the main crops, that is pear millet, maize, and looking at carbon fixing seeds such as coffee that we are applying when you're doing the climate resilient agriculture practices. So in terms of MACRACE, these are the key activities we are looking at to be able to enhance the current status of the center to a center of excellence in terms of advocating for climate resilient agriculture within the 3 regions or even at the national level.
Thank you so much, Mkwatu. And just wanted to let you know that your sound came in perfectly that time. And so it was really great to be able to hear you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.
We have another question from Vincent Peter. It says, for the purposes of impact assessment, is it possible to do an impact assessment for more than one output or component of a project, or even for an entire project? And Katerina, I'll send this question to you.
Thank you. Yes, thanks for this question, Peter. I think this is extremely important to clarify. So this depends on your project. So it always depends on who is targeted with the components. So if like the same group is targeted by different components, then you can evaluate those different components for the same group. This is not a problem. And then you can also look at different outputs or outcomes, whatever you will be interested in. But if your project focuses or targets maybe with different components, different groups, then this will rather be different impact assessments, right? Not only one. Or what oftentimes is the case, that one project component targets end beneficiaries, maybe farmers, for instance, and another project components focuses on institutional structures. And for institutional structures, those will be always difficult to evaluate because we cannot find a control group for that. So this will, once you improve institutional structures, then the whole nation will likely be able to benefit from those. So there won't be a group which doesn't benefit and would therefore be feasible as a control group. So it depends a lot on the creation of the control group. I hope this was clear. Otherwise, please ask again and I can explain more.
Thank you very much, Katarina. And Vincent, Mr. Vincent Peter, I hope that answered your question. If not, as Katarina mentioned, please feel free to raise your hand or to ask more questions in the chat box. Is there anybody that has a burning question that they've been waiting to ask? It's been really great to hear from the projects and to have a bit more interactive session today. And so I hope that this has also been very informative for everyone. And we look forward to more discussions to come in the other webinars. There's still some time if anyone would like to come in with a question or to raise your hand. If not, before we wrap up today, I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you very much to the two projects that were able to share your presentations about your theories of change. Not only did we get to hear more about your projects, but it was great to be able to hear about your processes and just learn more from your projects. And thank you very much to Katarina and Clementine and Martin for your insights and your inputs and feedback for this presentation, for this webinar. And before the end of our webinar, we would like to take a group photo. And I wonder if everyone would be able to turn on your camera so that we can take a group shot together. So we can see each other. We did this last week as well. Great. I see just a couple more cameras. Thank you very much, everyone. It's so great to see all of your faces together. Okay. Then I'll just count us down. All right, 1, 2, 3. Great. Thank you so much, everyone. And in the meantime, if you have any questions during the week, you will be in touch with your impact specialists that are leading your breakout sessions. So please feel free to share with them or to contact us. And someone, Peter Christopher, has also asked to please share the picture, and so we'll be sure to do that. Thank you so much for the request. Great. I hope that your breakout sessions for this coming week will also be exciting as last week. And as you already know, oh, I forgot the quiz. As you already know, you will receive the video for the next webinar that we'll have next week, and you'll receive the links and all the information in your emails. I completely forgot about the quiz. And so thank you for sticking around. We'll do that really quick because we still have some time. If everyone could go to Mentimeter or menti.com, and the passcode is listed in the chat box. The passcode, if you're ready, the code is 9166 9396. Again, that's 9166 9396. And we'll see everyone entering the quiz very soon. Last week we had some close competition, and so it'll be really exciting to see as the weeks come along how that competition continues. For those of you who are still joining the quiz, it's menti.com, and the code is 9166 9396. And if you'd like, in the chat box, it already has the link for menti.com. You can just click on it and then enter the code. Wow, we see so many have already joined. I'm personally very excited about this quiz. Great. We have about half of us that have joined. Wait for just a couple more, because I know that the competition can be pretty good in this group. All right. I think we can get started. If we could start the quiz, please. Great. Here's question number 1. Why do we use a theory of change? You'll see the options on your phone or the device. Is it to test how successful a project will be within a certain context? Or is it to see how underlying assumptions and impact contribute to a project? Or perhaps it's for ongoing reflection on change and how it happens. What will the answer be this time? Why do we use a theory of change? You have 5 seconds left. And here we are. Wow, this was pretty close. And this time it got a bit tricky because there was more than one answer that was correct. And so just as a reminder, your speed matters as well. And the correct answers were to see how underlying assumptions and impact contribute to a project, as well as for ongoing reflection on change and how it happens. Let's see who's leading.
Deborah, hello, Deborah.
Yes.
The time to respond was too short.
Okay, next time we'll lengthen the time.
By the time you finished reading, it wasn't there anymore.
Thank you so much for that feedback. We'll lengthen a little bit for next time.
Okay.
Let's go on the leaderboard. Do we have the leaderboard? Then one more arrow. It's always so exciting to have worldwide Zoom calls, right? The technical challenges. Oh, no. Don't worry, your results have not been lost. I'm sure we'll get it back soon. Are there some technical issues with the quiz? You know, I think I amped up the competition too much and now Menti has frozen. Here we go. Wow. Even on speed, I can see we have a lot of competition. Great, let's go to question number 2. Okay, here you'll see different nodes that you can drag. This is to order the steps of a theory of change. So if you know that something comes first, then you won't move it as much. If you know it comes last, you'll drag it all the way. So in what order do outputs, implementation strategies, outcomes, and impact go? Wow. I think we have a few more answers coming. Here we go. And still moving. Wow. I believe there are about 20 people left that have still answered. It looks like it's going to be quite a close call. And still going. I think we're almost there. I'm so curious what this leaderboard is going to look like. This is going to be a really close one. I can feel it. Great. It looks like we've gotten just about everyone. And we're still moving. It looks like maybe that's all the answers, the respondents. Let's see the leaderboard. Who will it be? Wow. It's still pretty close. Great. Let's go on to question number 3. This question is a reminder of the leaderboard. All right, question number 3 is, everyone, we've had quite the number of technical challenges today. And so once again, I just want to thank you for your patience. Great. What will this question be? How does the theory of change support an impact evaluation? The multiple choice is up open on your phone or your device. Does it replace evidence needed for evaluation questions? Does it help identify questions, variables, and the outcomes of impact evaluations? Or does it clarify the accountability of impact evaluations? Hopefully this time it'll be enough time. 5 seconds to go. 3, 2, 1. And the answer is, okay, great job. It helps identify questions, variables, and the outcomes of impact evaluations. What does a leaderboard look like this time? Wow. Okay, we're seeing some closer competition. I won't be surprised if it evens out a lot more. Great. Let's go to the last question. Remember, your speed counts as well. Question 5, what are the different types of impact? We'll have 4 multiple choice. Is it positive and negative impact, primary or secondary outputs, intended or unintended, or inclusive and exclusive? Some of these were mentioned a lot in our presentations today. Some of these were not mentioned at all. And 3 seconds to go. Wow, great job, everyone. Once again, we had 2 questions that were correct, and it was positive and negative, as well as intended and unintended. Great, what does a leaderboard look like now? I'm so curious. Okay. I see it's evening out a bit. Graciela Reyes. Once again, I remember last time you were in 2nd place, and I see that you've got that competition in you, so congratulations. Thank you, everyone, for your eager participation. And I hope that the webinar 2 was as exciting for you as it was for me. And we also look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you once again so much for your attention and all of your time dedicated to the LORTA Design Workshop. We really appreciate having you here, and we look forward to more in the weeks to come. Thank you so much. Take care.